The first thing the responding officers noticed wasn't a scream. It wasn't the sound of a struggle or the chaotic noise of a break-in. It was music. Loud, joyful, triumphant gospel music blasting through the walls of a quiet, unassuming suburban house in Plano, Texas. It was November 22nd, 2004. Officers had rushed to the scene because of a 911 call that didn't make any sense. The operator had dispatched them with a sense of urgency, but also total confusion. When the police walked through the front door, the air inside the house felt heavy, thick with a metallic smell that every law enforcement officer knows, but hopes never to encounter. The song, "He Touched Me," was playing so loud it made it hard to think. The lyrics praising God filling every corner of the living room. Sitting in the center of that room was a woman named Dena Schlosser. She looked totally calm. She was just sitting there, seemingly at peace, listening to the hymn. But just a few feet away from her, inside a baby's crib, was a scene that the seasoned officers would later describe as the most deranged, most unspeakable thing they had ever witnessed in their careers. The officers froze. They looked at Dena, who was covered in blood. Then they looked at the crib. And for a few seconds, the only sound in the world was that gospel choir singing about being touched by God. To understand how a mother reaches that point, we have to step out of that living room and go back to a time when Dena was just a girl trying to survive a difficult childhood. Dena Leitner wasn't born a monster. She was born in 1969 in upstate New York into a quiet middle-class family. But from day one, the odds were stacked against her. She was born with hydrocephalus, a condition that causes excessive fluid to build up in the brain. While other kids were playing outside, Dena was enduring 8 different surgeries before she even hit her teenage years. Her head had to be shaved constantly for the procedures. Other children, sensing weakness, were cruel. They called her Potato Head. They mocked her. It was the kind of isolation that drives a person inward. Dena retreated into the safety of her home, her books, and, most importantly, her Bible. Scripture became her escape. It was the one place where she wasn't an outcast. She was a child of God. She did everything right after that. She studied hard, got into Marist College, and earned a psychology degree. She met a man named Dena Schlosser, who shared her deep, unwavering faith. They were the perfect Christian couple. They moved to Texas, the heart of the Bible Belt, to find better jobs and start a large family. By the outside world standards, they were an American success story. But inside the Schlosser home, the walls were closing in. In December 2003, Dena gave birth to her third daughter, Margaret. This should have been a blessing, but Dena's mind was already fracturing. The very day after Margaret was born, Dena attempted suicide. It was a desperate cry for help that vanished into the void. There was no intervention, no long-term psychiatric hold. She was sent back home to care for a newborn, while her reality began to melt away. Then came the incident that should have been the final warning. Neighbors watched in confusion as Dena bolted out of her house, running down the suburban street in a panic, screaming. Chasing after her, pedaling as fast as her little legs could carry her, was her 5-year-old daughter on a bicycle, trying to catch her terrified mother. When police and social workers arrived, Dena was manic. She was babbling, but even then, the system blinked. She was hospitalized briefly, diagnosed, and then released. "She's not violent," they said. "She's not a threat." They were wrong. Dena had fallen under the spell of a charismatic preacher named Doyle Davidson at the Water of Life Church. This wasn't your standard Sunday service. This was fire and brimstone. Davidson preached that the town of Plano was infested with demons. He spoke of the Jezebel spirit, and Dena, with her history of isolation and her fracturing mind, didn't just listen. She believed she was receiving secret messages. This brings us to the most chilling piece of evidence in this story, the trigger that no one saw coming. It wasn't a voice in her head initially, it was the television. Dena had been watching the news when a story came on about a boy who had been mauled by a lion. To you and me, that's a tragedy. To Dena, it was a signal. She believed the lion represented the end of days. She believed the apocalypse wasn't coming. She believed it was already here. She became convinced that God was demanding a sacrifice to protect her family from the coming hellfire. She actually tried to warn people. In a moment of twisted clarity, she took baby Margaret to the church and literally offered the baby to Doyle Davidson. She tried to give her child away to the preacher. He refused. He sent her home. That leads us back to November 22nd, 2004. Dena Schlosser left for work. The two older daughters were at school. Dena was alone in the house with 11-month-old Margaret. The silence of the house must have felt deafening, so she turned on the music. She put on a gospel tape. She needed to feel the spirit. As the song "He Touched Me" began to play, Dena walked into the kitchen. She didn't grab a weapon of war. She didn't grab a gun. She opened the drawer and pulled out a simple kitchen knife. She walked into the nursery. The baby was likely looking up at her mother, trusting and innocent. Dena didn't see a baby. She saw a soul that needed to be saved from the apocalypse. In her delusion, she believed she was commanded to do this. She didn't suffocate the child. She didn't make it quick. Dena took the knife and began to cut. She severed the baby's arms. When it was over, she didn't try to flee. She didn't try to hide the body. She walked to the phone, covered in the blood of her own child, and dialed 911. The operator answered, "911, what is your emergency?" Dena's voice was flat, emotionless. "I cut off her arms." The operator paused, confused. "You did what?" "I cut off her arms." When the police arrived, they found Dena calm. The music was still blaring. The disconnect between the joyful hymn and the carnage in the crib was so profound that officers required counseling for years afterward. They arrested her on the spot, but the question wasn't about guilt. It was about sanity. The trial was a spectacle. The defense argued she was insane, driven by postpartum psychosis and religious delusions fed by the church. The prosecution tried to argue she knew right from wrong, but the evidence was overwhelming. Even the state's own experts had to admit Dena Schlosser thought she was serving God. In 2006, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity. But the story doesn't end in the courtroom. This is where it gets truly unsettling. Dena was sent to the North Texas State Hospital, and in a twist that feels like bad fiction, she was assigned a roommate. That roommate was Andrea Yates, the woman who had drowned her 5 children in a bathtub just a few years prior. The two most notorious mothers in Texas history living in the same room, reading the Bible together, bonding over the scriptures that they believed justified their actions. Most people assume Dena is still locked away in a padded room, safely separated from society. She isn't. In 2008, doctors determined that Dena was no longer a threat. She had been medicated. She was stable. Because she wasn't a convicted criminal, Remember, she was found not guilty. Her release was not public record. She was quietly let out into the world. She changed her name back to her maiden name, Leitner. She moved into an apartment. She walked the streets. She got a job. In 2012, news broke that caused a panic in a local community. A reporter discovered that a woman working at the local Walmart, scanning groceries and greeting customers, looked familiar. It was Dena, the woman who had severed her baby's arms to save her from the apocalypse, was now bagging milk and eggs for unsuspecting families. She was fired once the news broke, and she drifted back into the shadows. Dena Schlosser is still out there. She lives in anonymity. She walks the same streets as you. She shops at the same stores. And if you walked past her today, you wouldn't see a monster. You would just see a quiet, middle-aged woman, perhaps humming a gospel tune, waiting for the end of the world.